That's our focus for the next couple of minutes, and it continues in Abuja. Hello, guys.
Well, yeah, we do have Dr. Oyewole, as you may have seen in that welcoming slide. He is a Yale University and Aspen Institute Fellow. And then Dr. actually earned his first degree in African politics at the University of South Africa. He worked there, and then before he eventually went to the UK. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Pleasure to be here. I wish it was in more pleasant circumstances.
Yeah, but this is unfolding.
Correct.
Different perspectives, particularly the narratives from South Africa, government officials, those who are affected, the foreigners, Nigerians particularly, and how we have responded to it and will and should respond to it moving forward. This is not the first time you may have experienced or spoken about this kind of matter, but now that it's taken this turn, this dimension, what do you think?
Well, interestingly, to start off from the point of it's not the first time, is I actually published articles about this 20 years ago. This was when a lot of Africans started traveling to South Africa. And it's quite unfortunate that 20 years, we've had 20 years to look at this issue, to try and address it, and it has not happened. But I really think we need to step back and say, what is really fueling it? I think there are two sides of the story, but it's also joint in the middle in a sense, because I think what we're seeing is a manifestation of the dashed hopes and aspirations of Nigerians and South Africans. I was in South Africa just after apartheid. I was right there when Thabo Mbeki was being sworn in, and the sense of optimism was palpable. Everybody thought, particularly the Black South Africans who had been excluded from the economy, that this was the opportunity to be part of the economy. They thought they would get jobs. They thought there would be greater economic prosperity, but they did not see that happening. Here in Nigeria, we all went through the military dictatorship. In 1999, we came into democracy. Again, we were excited, and we all hoped for the dividends of democracy in economic terms. That, unfortunately, did not happen the way we wanted. So you have people who moved from Nigeria to South Africa seeking greener pastures, and you have the South Africans who finally were allowed to, shall I say, enjoy the greener pastures, but it's now been shared. I think the fact that the resources, that the jobs and the opportunities they're looking for are limited, and there are larger numbers of people, is one of the things that has created this. But there is another issue, which is the fact that we don't know one another. You just referred to me as a Yale and an Aspen fellow. Many of us travel to Europe, we go to America, we learn the culture, we know the people. South Africans and Nigerians are not really engaged in the kind of cultural exchange that will create that kind of understanding that will help us to be able to address this kind of challenges when they come up.
But that those who wonder then, it's different if that bilateral or that commission exists or that kind of cultural exchange exists between African countries and maybe Europe, Asia, and the likes, or South America. But some argue, if it's an African country, how much of that do we really need to understand ourselves?
Well, you must remember that, I sat in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings. South Africans, Black South Africans, were completely cut off from the rest of Africa. As a matter of fact, what we were told was that the rest of Africa was poor, filled with disease, and of course, they never really understood the level of development or the advancement other Africans had made. So when they engage with other Africans, and this is not everybody, by the way, we also have to bear in mind that we're also dealing with socioeconomic classes. At the higher echelons, the businessmen who are doing business in Nigeria, obviously, they know their opportunities across Africa. But I think in the lower socioeconomic cadres, people do not know. And therefore, their thinking is that these Africans are here because they have nothing, and they're here to take what we have. And it's quite unfortunate. I think the other thing that, as we see, is a leadership vacuum in terms of thinking of it in a Pan-Africanist perspective. Before President Mbeki, Mandela, Obasanjo, Abdoulaye Wade in South Africa, they started NEPAD. They had that sense of African unity because they were all part of the struggle either against colonization or against apartheid. But in the current era, we won those wars. And now, when Africa is meant to come together to actually work together, these two economic giants, economic pillars of the continent are meant to work together. Unfortunately, that engagement has not been forged. The Binational Commission, which you mentioned, which started in 1999, it stopped somewhat and was resuscitated in 2016. But it's a government-to-government engagement. What about the people? What we see on the streets are people fighting people, not governments fighting government. So we really need to find a way where we connect Nigerians and South Africans and help them to understand that even the Nigerians who are perpetrating crimes in South Africa are just like 1% of the population.
All right, well, we'll see if we can also look at the engagement that has gone on between government and the people and see if there's any nexus fueling some of these things. That's when we'll return in a moment. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. Well, that was speaking about the communication that has gone on between the political class of politicians over there and the people, that kind of engagement. We have seen narratives, images, clips here, which of some politicians in South Africa, key ones at that, which did suggest or fueling this kinds of attack from the politicians. Yes, they want to get votes, but we know that if Nigerian politicians were to say that, we will call them out. But do you think that what kind of impact do those messages have with this?
You know, you're absolutely right. And I think the South African government needs to do better, without a doubt. And I think this is a time when that calls for great leadership. And what is leadership? Leadership is rising above the fray when emotions are high. And what we see in this scenario is some of them, not all, some of those leaders have actually fueled it. But I think it's also cause for us to be proud of some of our politicians and leaders in Nigeria. I think Abike Dabiri, for example, has done a great job in trying to calm nerves and create an opportunity for the Nigerians to come back, and she at least has helped to establish a dialogue. I think the vice president also has come out and he has spoken and called Nigerians to calm down, and even our security forces, who we saw protecting the investments of South Africans in Nigeria. So I think, in a sense, that there's a requirement for greater responsibility and also maturity in terms of the kind of utterances that you're hearing from South African government officials, without a doubt.
You forgive me for taking you back. You mentioned earlier that this whole thing started some 20 years back. You talked about articles that have been written along that line. That was 20 years ago, was 5 years after apartheid ended. April 27 of 1990 was supposed to have ended. It would seem then there wasn't any form of preparation of the people for post-apartheid South Africa.
I mean, if we don't have enough time to even go into depth of it, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, you have to understand, this was a battle that South Africans fought. And South Africans till today are still very traumatized by a lot of horrific things that happened. But when democracy came, I do not think South Africa was prepared in terms of grooming and having leaders who understood how the world worked, who understood Africa more broadly, and how to engage with the rest of the continent. I think the people, President Mandela and Mbeki, who lived in Nigeria from 1976 to 1978, they understood these things. And you could see that was the time of the whole concept of African Renaissance. The NEPAD, the African Union, the OAU became the African Union. So we were going in the right direction. But somewhere along the line, something broke. And what we're seeing today is that vacuum that wasn't filled in terms of leadership, in terms of connecting the people across the continent and helping them to understand one another more effectively.
You also talked about the distance between the governed and the government.
Correct.
In South Africa. Is there any way that should have been done better? Because from the political rhetorics which Chamberlain mentioned earlier, it would seem like I don't know. What do you think of it?
No, you're absolutely correct in that regard. And you must remember, the ruling party in South Africa is also struggling. The ANC itself, that used to win landslide victories in the elections, are really, really struggling. So, I mean, we had a scenario where Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who was one of the most respected Zulu leaders, came to speak to people, and people walked away. So what is happening is... Unlike before. He would command, I mean, if Mangosuthu Buthelezi told people to do something, they would say, yes, sir, so to speak. So we're seeing that another issue you need to bear in mind is there's a younger generation. This younger generation do not necessarily understand what happened during apartheid. They do not understand the struggles that Mandela and the others fought. So now what they are thinking about is there now. How do we have money in our pockets? How do we have jobs? How do we have security? And it's unfortunate that when they have not gotten these things, they're looking at other black South Africans. And I think we need to correct something. We keep on saying xenophobia, xenophobia, xenophobia. Xenophobia is the fear or the hatred of foreigners. In this instance, it's about black foreigners. So it is actually more Afrophobia than xenophobia. I know British people, New Zealanders, Australians, Chinese, Israelis who live in South Africa and have businesses in South Africa. None of them were attacked. So unfortunately, something in the psyche makes our fellow brothers and sisters in South Africa see other black people as their competition as opposed to their collaborators. And I think we can still change this narrative if leaders at the political level and as well as in civil society and even in the music and entertainment industry take leadership in this regard.
But if it is Afrophobia, don't forget there are different categories of Nigerians in South Africa. Correct. So, but talk about this first two. You have the professionals who are there, those in the medical field, in science and engineering, who are excelling in that field of endeavor, and those who are in high caliber business areas, then those who are doing menial jobs. Correct. So if they, at the moment, you understand, they are largely targeting those who are doing the menial jobs, saying they're taking away their jobs. So if those group of people were to leave, and then they come across the professionals, are they still going to feel that these are our competitors, even if they don't have the skill set to match up or replace those people?
I think it's more of how the perception is. I think if someone has that perception that a foreigner is a competitor at any of those levels, they will still feel the same way.
So it's blurred, the line is blurred.
The line is very blurred. However, I think it's also important for us to take responsibility as Nigerians. The cadre of people that you didn't mention are the Nigerians who are perpetrating crimes in South Africa. And they are giving us a bad
less
name.
than, the list of them, less than 1%.
Yes, but obviously we can see, what did they say? One bad apple can spoil the whole basket. So in this instance, I think what needs to happen is Nigerians, our security operatives, and the South African operatives need to come together and say, how do we deal with these criminals particularly? And this is how mature governments work. If we're able to eliminate the criminal elements and we're able to, shall I say, project and talk a bit more about the value that Nigerians and other Africans bring to South Africa, I think we might begin to start turning the tide. Let's
Speak to this one very quickly. Unfolding scenario, critical one, is that Nigerians are coming home. Correct. What would you say to them? Is there anything government needs to do for them?
Well, that's something I was thinking about, because we have, 600 people who have already signed up to come home. They're coming home. They probably may not have places to stay. They probably may not have jobs. So we are, shall I say, bringing back our problems, so to speak. And so as we're thinking about bringing our folks home, I think we have to commend Air Peace. We have to commend the government for making the effort. This is how a responsible government should act towards its citizens. But we immediately now need to start thinking, what kind of relief package can we prepare for them? What kind of opportunities are we going to give them? And when they also start looking for jobs and opportunity and employment, how can we make sure that we don't have a scenario that some of the Nigerians, very much like the guys who came back from Libya, we now start saying we're back, but we still have the same problem. And I think I've heard that there's an idea about them being brought in through the Bank of Industry and being given opportunities. But I think we need to focus on that in a more critical manner. And more importantly, we need to deal with the economic circumstances at home that even makes young Nigerians who should be building our nation and building our economy actually flying out to different parts of the world to go and contribute to other economies.
Yeah, because some of them may have seen now that the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side. But one more thing before you go. Sure. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we've seen them tweet, speak strongly. They usually will be very diplomatic about this before. How do you see them, their relationship with their foreign affairs counterpart in SA, and what should they be doing in terms of ensuring that countries take us, or South Africa take us a lot more seriously?
Well, I think one thing we need to bear in mind is Nigeria as a nation is older, it's more mature, and it has been at the very core of the African independence agenda and the Pan-Africanist agenda globally. So our understanding of foreign affairs and the way in which we're meant to engage is a lot more, shall I say, mature and nuanced. I think our South African counterparts may want to borrow a leaf or two from seeing how we've been tempered and we've restrained, and strength is really about restraint. One other thing we need to bear in mind is, look, at the end of the day, South Africans have more investments in Nigeria. We don't have large companies like MTN and the others in South Africa. I think we also need to start asking ourselves, how do we start building these global brands? I think if Nigeria was able to say, we will pool our companies that employ 20,000, 30, 40,000 South Africans, South Africa will sit up. As at now, we can complain, we can bark, but we really don't have much bite. And that's something we need to deal with.
And we do know we have the capacity and we have Nigerians who can play in that field. So we just need to activate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming on. Dr. Oyewole is a Yale University and Aspen Institute Fellow. Well, we will be back in a moment and focus on something a little different. Stay with us.